Hello, everyone, and welcome back to American Ultras Talk. With the first USMNT camp post Greg Berhalter coming up pretty soon, we decided to look at the potential roster that the USMNT could call up for this camp, marking a new era for the program in hopes to potentially make a run in the 2026 World Cup. Now, I say we, but as you can see, I'm here by myself. The last video was just Yuri. Today it's going to be just me. Due to our schedules, it just makes sense to have some solo videos. We'll still try to record together as much as we can, but for now, it's just going to be easier this way. So hopefully you enjoy. Let me know how I did at the end of the video, and hopefully you guys can still enjoy the solo videos despite it not being both of us. So without further ado, let's get into the potential roster. Now, since it won't be Pochettino who's going to be running this camp, it's going to be the former U20 coach, Mikey Varas. The Pochettino announcement still hasn't been made, and it came out a while back that Varas would run the camp even if we did have a manager by the time of the roster being selected. It's a little bit difficult to actually predict who's going to be on it, so I just went with a 26-man roster that I would like to see called up because, again, we don't know who Varas is going to prefer over others. We don't know if it's going to be mainly the A-team guys. Maybe some of his old U20 guys are going to come in and get a chance with the senior team. So I went with a mix of that, a mix of experience and youth. So let's just get into the goalkeepers. Now, for the goalkeepers, I think it's fair to say we definitely need a new era of them because Matt Turner's not cutting it anymore. He's not even making matchday squads for Nottingham Forest. So I decided to call up 3 completely new keepers. Also, no Ethan Horvath because, I mean, if any of you guys saw his mistake that he made, I think it's pretty clear that he's finished at this level and he's not going to be a long-term solution for us. So it's time to maybe find someone who could. To start with that, it's going to be Gabriel Slonina, who I want to start in this camp. He got the loan move to Barnsley, and he's been doing very well for them so far. It's a low level, yes, but he's a former U20 player himself, and I think that it's time to give him a chance, especially with the lack of young goalkeeper options we have and lack of good keeper options in general. I think he deserves his shot, especially since he didn't get it at the Olympics. Now, the guy who did get the chance at the Olympics, Patrick Schulte, I think should also be called up. I think it makes sense to have them continue to compete against each other. Now, moving up from the U23s to the main team, he's been having a pretty good season with Columbus Crew. And then speaking of players who have had good seasons in MLS, the last goalkeeper I'd called up is a bit of a rogue one for most fans, I think. It's going to be Matt Fries from NYCFC. I just think that he's probably been, without a doubt, the best American goalkeeper in MLS, and considering the lack of options, he's still pretty young, like 25 or so, I believe. So I think it's worth it to at least give him a shot, especially in this camp where the stakes aren't really high. It's just meaningless friendlies against bad opponents. So why not give him a shot and see what he can do? Maybe he doesn't even play. Maybe he's just training with the team. I still want Slonina to start, but at least bring him into a camp, get him with the group, and maybe he could be an option in the future. Now, moving on to the fullbacks, this is a difficult one to pick because for right back, I only went with one player. Serginho Dest is still obviously injured. He's going to be out for probably the rest of the year, at least coming back in early 2025. So I only went with Joe Scally, and that's because I believe the 2 immediate backup options, Brian Reynolds and Nathan Harriel, I just don't think either of them have done enough to warrant a call-up at this point. I just don't really rate either of their ceilings too highly. And then there's a potential option of Richie Ledesma, who has been playing right back for PSV. I just don't think he's going to be able to cut it against good opposition. He's not a long-term solution for them, and he's just not a right back in general, so I don't think it's worth wasting a spot on him, especially when we have, as you'll see later, a very stacked midfield. For the left back spots, I went for Jedi Robinson, of course. He picks himself. And then, even though I like Christopher Lund a lot, I actually gave the backup left back spot to John Tolkien, just because his Olympics campaign was so good, and I think he deserves a chance to prove himself with this team. I think in the next couple of camps, and especially once Pochettino comes in, you're going to see a lot of rotation between the backup left backs because there's John Tolkien, Caleb Wiley, Christopher Lund, maybe Nathaniel Brown if we can get him to commit. They can all compete for that spot, and I don't think any of them has a clear advantage over the other as of now. So giving some of them a chance that haven't had a chance yet, like Tolkien, I think makes sense. Lund's been with the A team for a while, and unfortunately, he just never gets minutes because Jedi takes them all. But at least having Tolkien in the group, I think, could help him out a lot. So I went with those 3 fullbacks. Now on to the centerbacks. I think again, it's another position where we need a lot of change because Tim Ream just moved to Charlotte and he's getting up there in age. He's not going to be a realistic option for 2026. Cameron Carter-Vickers is beyond horrible, as we saw in Copa America, and he's still at Celtic, not improving his level. Same for Miles Robinson at Atlanta. He's not improving his level. I don't think any of these guys should be options for 2026. So I called up Chris Richards, of course, our best center back, although he's going to need to get back into form at Palace pretty quickly or he might lose his spot there. Mark McKenzie just made the move to Toulouse in League One, and I think it's time to finally give him his chance to start next to Richards as the left center back. It's where he's been playing for Genk for a while now and been doing pretty well there. He's very fast, which is nice. It has the physical attributes. Maybe the technicality needs to be worked on a little bit, but I don't think we should be playing out of the back with this skill set of players anyway. So I think McKenzie deserves his chance, and he's one who does have a realistic shot at being the starter in 2026. And then for the two others, I decided to call up one Olympic guy and one guy who maybe should have made the Olympics roster. Mikey Vargas' former U20, Jalen Neal, I think should be here. He hasn't been the best with the LA Galaxy, but he is winning his starting spot back after that lengthy injury, and he still does have one of the highest potentials of some of our center backs that we have, and he's ready enough to the point where I think it's worth giving him a shot with the senior team, as well as Maximilian Dietz. He's been playing for Greuther Fürth in the Zweite Bundesliga, and I think he's, again, done well enough to warrant a call-up. His Olympics wasn't great because he was playing out of position at the 6, but I think if you put him as a center back and get him to learn from Richards and McKenzie, it's not the best players to learn from, but it's all we have, really. So I think giving some of the young guys a chance to integrate themselves into the group could be really beneficial for the center backs. Now, moving on to the midfield, and like I mentioned earlier, it's going to be a lot of midfielders. I'll start with the 6s, and I'm calling up 3 of them. Tyler Adams is injured, so he's not here. Truthfully, I don't know if he would have been here anyway because we have Johnny Cardoso, we have Leonard Maloney, and we have Tanner Tessman. And all of them have been in great form. Although Maloney's season hasn't started, he's helping Heidenheim qualify for Europe. He was on the bench for that game because he's going to start in their first Bundesliga game this coming weekend. And of course, Johnny Cardoso, we know what he's been doing. Also, kind of a similar thing, getting benched in the league to help them qualify for Europe. He started in their Thursday night game against, I don't remember the team name. It's some obscure team from Europe, but they won that game. They're looking like they're going to qualify, as well as Maloney and Heidenheim. And then for the third one, Tanner Tessman, our captain at the Olympics. I think he's deserved a serious look at the USMNT for a while. He did get that call-up back last fall. Didn't really impress, but I think that was slightly too early for him. Now he's fully ready to integrate himself into the team, and I expect him to be an option from here on out. Finally is finalizing a move to Lyon reportedly as well, which is very exciting. He's going to be playing at a high level also in Europe, so having 3 CDM options that are playing at that kind of level is really great to see, honestly. And even without Tyler Adams, we're still stacked at the position. Moving on to the regular center mids, the box-to-box players, I called up the main 2, Weston McKennie and Yunus Musa. I think it just makes the most sense considering our lack of options there. Gianluca Busio is injured. He would have maybe had a shout over one of them because honestly, I think McKennie just kind of needs to get back into form with Juventus, establish himself back in the team. He did just sign an extension for another year, but he's still a bench player for now until he can prove them wrong, which I think he can do. I mean, we saw what happened last season, but until then, maybe it's worthwhile to give someone else a shot, and that's why I decided to also bring in Jack McGlynn to this group. I don't think Luca De La Torre, calling him up, makes sense because he still needs to find a new club. He's not in Celta Vigo's plans, and realistically, I don't see him as an option for the 2026 World Cup. McGlynn is someone who's such a unique player. I mean, his passing range and vision with his left foot is second to none in the pool, and I think having a player like that who's kind of a specialist that I kind of referred to similarly in our predicting the 2026 World Cup roster video that we had a couple weeks back. I think having someone like that on the roster could work wonders. And again, he's a former U20 guy from Varus, so I expect him to reward some of those players. And I think McGlynn's a perfect one. It's also been rumored that he could be called up as well, so it just makes perfect sense to pick him here. Now, moving on to the final section of the midfield, the cams. And this is another one. I decided to call up 9 midfielders because, again, that backup right back spot, we could put McKennie there, we could put Musa there if we absolutely need to, because realistically, it's just going to be Scally the whole time. I don't rate our other right backs, like I said. And then speaking of defense, actually, one thing I forgot to say, I wouldn't be against seeing Leonard Maloney be tried as a center back as well, especially since the two backup center backs that I called up here are very young. I don't know if they're fully ready for the level yet. I think Maloney can do a job there, just his player profile and the fact that he came up through Dortmund's academy and I think Union Berlin's academy as well. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but he came up there as a center back, so I know he made the switch to the six, but I think he could do a job at the back, and considering our lack of options, it's some versatility that I think warrants a call up for sure. But moving on to the 10s, I decided to call up, of course, Gio Reyna and Malik Tillman, our main guys, and also maybe one, you can see him in behind me, the jerseys, Brendan Aronson. I think he started life so well back at Leeds. There's been a lot of pressure on him due to how poorly he played for them in the Premier League 2 seasons back, and then leaving them when they got relegated, going to Union Berlin. But he's back. He's playing the 10 now with Jorginho Ruther sold, and he's playing really well. Already 2 goals in the championship. He's slowly but surely winning back the heart of the Leeds fans. They even sang his American Boy chant after his goal in the last game. So I think it's worth giving him a call up. And I know Pochettino won't be leading this camp, but I expect to see some of his ideas used, just because it'd be kind of a waste if they weren't. And he's traditionally gotten so much out of his 10s. I think Brendan deserves to compete for that spot, especially considering the fact that Gio Reyna isn't going to get many minutes this season. He hasn't gotten many minutes in over a season, and the last time he did, he just keeps getting injured. So I think bringing in some competition with him, and of course Malik Tillman as well, who's playing well for PSV, had a great season for them last year as well. I think that could be beneficial for all of them to at least get a look with this group. Now, moving on to the final part of the roster, the forwards. And I'll start with the wingers, because this is one that I think has the most open spots, because Kevin Paredes, who was very, very good at the Olympics and is poised to have hopefully a breakout season for Wolfsburg, is injured, as well as Tim Weah, who finally scored his first Serie A goal in Juve's opener in the league. He did come off at halftime with an injury. It looks like both of them are going to be out past international break. Hopefully they come back soon after that, but it means they're not eligible to be called up here. So there's a lot of options. And I'm going to start with Christian Pulisic, of course, Captain America. He has to be here. I want to integrate some of the young guys, and you'll see that, but you have to have Pulisic here to help them along the way, help them in the process, teach them a few things. And then on the other side, this one is kind of contingent on him accepting, because it's a dual national, of course, multinational actually. He's got 4 nationalities, someone who could even potentially be called up to Italy. And I think we need to just keep giving him a call until he accepts, basically. It's Luka Kolyasho. He's been playing well for Burnley, started the season well despite coming off a major injury himself. And I just think he's such a good player that we can't afford to lose out on. We have to continue to give him the call until he accepts. Now, that being said, I don't think he will accept. So to give his place to someone else, I'm going to go for Diego Luna on that left-hand side. I think he's, again, another former U20 under Mikey Varas who deserves a look. I mean, he was stumped for the Olympics. And again, someone kind of like McGlynn, not in play style, but in his situation, because he's someone who's so unique and can bring something that no one else has to the USMNT. Just the way he plays is so un-American, and it's good to have a player like that in the roster. He's another one who can also fit in at the 10, so maybe there's a bit of a conflict there, but I think having him as a backup winger makes a lot of sense as well, especially when you consider that our 10s can also play winger and then vice versa. I think he's warrants a call up and a look at this group. Now, on the other side, on the right side, another U20, the best U20 that Mikey Varas ever had, Paxton Aronson, Brendan's brother. I want to have them both in the same camp for the second time now, and I think Paxton warrants it. He started life at Utrecht very well and had a great Olympics campaign, playing at the false 9 and out wide. And of course, we saw when he was with the U20s under Varas, he won the Golden Boot and Golden Ball in the CONCACAF U20 Championship, so I think he definitely deserves a call-up. I put him on the wing here. He can also play as a false 9, as a 10, on either side of the wings. Actually very versatile, and I think that's helpful to have, especially as we have so many players. I mean, you want to have players who can play in multiple different roles, or you might not get minutes. So I wanted to give Paxton a call-up, and his Olympic teammate as well took the final spot for the wingers, Griffin Yao. I think he's someone who both me and Yuri have been very high on for a while now. Had a breakout season with Westerlo last year, and hopefully we'll be moving on to a bigger challenge this coming season. There's still a couple weeks left in the transfer window for that to happen, and I just think it makes sense to give him the call-up. He was so electric at the Olympics, and especially in the second half of the season with Westerlo, So I do think he deserves the call-up, especially with Kevin Paredes out and Tim Weah. I think we need to reward some of the youth guys who have been performing at a high level. And that leaves us just with the strikers. And it's a pretty straightforward group. I went for Fowler and Balogun, Ricardo Pepi, and Haji Wright. I don't want to leave out Sargent necessarily, but I think he's one of those fringe players, kind of like Luca De La Torre, kind of like Brendan Aronson, who I could have left out as well. But I just think it makes more sense to call up Haji Wright as a striker. We know he can play there or on the wing, and then leave that other spot for someone like Diego Luna, who probably would have been the first one cut if I were to call up Sargent. Just someone who's young, who hasn't been given enough chances and deserves a shot to integrate himself to the USMNT. Just see what he's about with the first team, maybe coming in the 60th minute for Pulisic in both games, and if he impresses, then perfect. We have another contender for a winger spot for the 2026 World Cup. But that's going to be my roster, my 26-man roster for the September camp for the USMNT. Let me know in the comments, guys. What do you think of this video? How did I do compared to Yuri? Maybe I know the solo videos aren't necessarily ideal for the audience, but it just makes the most sense with our schedules. Again, we'll try to at least do stock watch every week together, and maybe other videos as well down the line. And this is a short-term solution just for a couple of months while we figure out our schedules and times that work for us. But let me know in the comments as well. What do you think of my roster? Who would you call up? I think this is probably the most open debate we've had for a USMNT roster in a while. It's kind of been set in stone for the last year or so, and now with a new era coming in, a new batch of young players popping up in Europe and impressing at the youth levels, I think there's a lot of debate, a lot of competition for spots, and there's a lot of different approaches you could take to this roster too. So I'm very curious to hear you guys' thoughts in the comments on which players you want to see called up. Are there anyone who I maybe didn't say that you think deserves a shot, or players who I did pick that you don't think should be in the roster? I expect a lot of people are going to say Brendan Aronson shouldn't be there because there seems to be an agenda there. But thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you for Stock Watch on Monday.